to start with a bit of a story. And this is about Ben Carson. Ben Carson was a pediatric neurosurgeon in the States. He is a long-time government official, and at one point he was a presidential candidate. He started life from a poorer background, but he worked incredibly hard and attained a full scholarship to Yale to study medicine. But when he got there, he found that he no longer stood out amongst all the bright minds. He felt quite insecure. And he started to fail academically, particularly in the subject of chemistry, which for someone studying medicine was quite a big deal. And the night before one of his biggest chemistry tests, he'd stayed up late revising, but eventually, somewhere around midnight, he realized he just wasn't going to be ready. And he went to sleep praying the words, "God, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I've let you down and I've failed myself." That night, as he slept, he records that he had a remarkable dream, which had a profound impact on his life. And in the dream, he was in the chemistry lab alone, and a strange figure entered and began writing formula on the board. And in his dream, Ben Carson's there taking notes as if he's in a lecture. And when he woke, he firstly just assumed, it's probably just, his mind working through all the revision he'd been doing, and he didn't think too much of it. But the dream had clearly had some impact, and he jotted down as much of the formula and the things that he remembered from the dream. Later that morning, the test comes around. He's in the hall, he flips over the paper. I'm sure some of you can still remember the horrible, anxious feeling that comes with that moment. And as he does, he discovers that the questions he was being asked were exactly the same ones he'd been given in the dream the night before. Now, this is a pretty rational guy, so he thinks, well, can I trust this dream? Is this actually going to be right? Do I write these answers down? But I don't know if anyone else has been there, but when you've got nothing else, that's what you go with. And so, not having any other ideas what the answers might be, he went with it, and when the results came in a few weeks later, Ben Carson expected to fail chemistry, got 97% on this test. And that moment had a huge impact for him because he believed the dream had been given to him by God. And what it taught him, less than it did say anything about chemistry, it told him that God was with him, that God was for him. And that became like a key driver for his life. By the age of 33, he became the youngest chief of pediatric neurosurgery in America. By 50, he became one of Time's 20 top foremost physicians. And then in 2008, he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George Bush. And then in 2016, he ran for president, ceding the Republican nomination to Donald Trump. So this man he's had a significant life. And this moment was an incredibly profound moment in the midst of it. Now, this is not saying that this is a reliable method for revision for your exams. I see those the parents here saying, please don't tell my kids this. But we have to acknowledge that if true, there is something amazing about this story. And I say if true because, some of us are cynical, okay? Some of us are not going to find that natural. We would assume that maybe this is a little bit made up. It's a nice story. Generally, as a society, we find dreams to be an interesting anomaly, but not something we put too much stock in. But this would be a strange thing for him to make up. Even in the more religious setting of America, it's still a better story for the American audience to say that he just worked hard and pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and rather than say that he wasn't smart enough for the exam and that God helped him cheat. When he included this in his biography, Carson would have known that people would think he's weird for claiming this. He described the experience in his memoir saying, "I've never had a dream like that before. Neither had anyone that I know. It contradicted everything I'd read about in my psychological studies. The only possible explanation was humbling in its simplicity. That the God of the universe, who holds galaxies in his hands, had chosen to reach down into a university campus and give a dream to a discouraged ghetto kid who wanted to become a doctor." Now, today we are continuing our series on the awesome beyond the awkward, looking at how miracles and God's intervention are a normal part of the Christian faith. And this week we are focusing in on how God communicates to us through dreams and visions. We at Ascension believe that God speaks to his people both in dreams and visions, and he provides guidance, warning, comfort, and ultimately these things are a gift from God that we want to be more open to receiving and responding to. And just to give some clarity, when I say visions, this can mean both God showing us something physically through our eyes that exists only in the spiritual realm, And it can also mean God using our imagination to give us an idea of something that either exists or will one day exist spiritually. When I say dreams, again, that can be God speaking directly to people in a dream while they're asleep, or it could be God using people's dreams to communicate or reveal something deeper that they don't yet know or understand. Now, I remember from my A-level psychology course, an exam in which God did not miraculously provide the answers, that there are a number of theories around dreaming. Some scientists would say that they are just random byproducts of our brain processing the day, or that they are our repressed thoughts and wishes and desires, or that they are the consolidation and storing of memories. Those are just some of the kind of different ways that we make sense of dreaming. But Ben Carson's story suggests that there may be more to it than that. Now, as I was looking at sort of researching around this topic, this idea of dreams or visions, I just started asking people in the cafe. I was like, have you ever had a significant dream or something where you've dreamt and it's something inexplicable has come from it? You know, it's either pointed forward to something that's happened or it's made sense of something didn't. And I was absolutely blown away by the amount of people who had a story or knew someone who had a story of this being something they experienced. And so even though I think of this as being a very weird anomaly, it's also something that a lot of people experience and have drawn on and has been significant to them. But saying that, I'm also sure I'm not the only one who finds the idea of God speaking to us or using our dreams to be a bit weird, a bit awkward. And I can immediately see the risks involved in this, the potential for things to go very wrong when we start to make decisions based on discoveries from our dreams. And so I will come to those risks and worries, but I want to start by recognizing that dreams and visions are one of the most consistent ways that God speaks to his people through the Bible. So I'm going to go through some examples. In Genesis 28, God reveals truth to a man named Jacob through a dream of a ladder going up to heaven with angels going up and down it. In another instance, Jacob is commanded in a dream by God to go back to his uncle Laban, who he's had a disagreement with. Joseph, famous for his Technicolor Dreamcoat and his success in the West End, had a number of dreams from God that would point forward to events in the future. As well as that, he was recognized as someone who could interpret and understand dreams. And the interpretations that he shared were used to shape major economic and social strategy for the whole country. Another famous figure in the Bible, Gideon, is encouraged by God that he will have a victory over a rival army in a dream. One of the kings of Israel, Solomon, asks for wisdom from God in a conversation with God during a dream. Isaiah, a prophet, has a visionary experience of going to heaven and receives like his commission and the calling of his life in a dream. The prophet Joel, the one we read about in our reading today, gives this declaration that dreams and visions will be a marker of the end times, but also a marker of people who are filled with God's Spirit. Daniel, in another occasion, has and interprets numerous dreams and visions. And actually, there's bits in the Bible, whenever dreams and visions become less frequent, it's seen as a judgment from God. It's like almost God saying, that's it, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You know, like there's this moment where people go, wow, this is a worrying time when we don't hear God's voice. And that's the Old Testament. And you might be thinking, well, maybe we've grown out of that. That was those old times, different people, different times. Maybe Jesus did away with all of that in some way in the New Testament. He's given us some fresh revelations so that we don't need that. But that's, again, not what the Bible shows us. In 2 weeks' time, we and every other church on the planet are going to begin again to tell the story of Jesus coming into the world. But if you've heard that story before, if you've read about it, then you'll know that it is jam-packed with people receiving dreams and visions from God. The wise men are warned to avoid visiting Herod in a dream. Joseph is directed in a dream to leave Israel, and then in another dream is directed to come back. And then later in the New Testament, after Jesus ascends into heaven, one of his followers, Simon Peter, is told in a dream that he should change the way he thinks about non-Jewish believers, to actually completely change the way he engages with them, and it makes a huge impact on his life. The Apostle Paul, the writer of the majority of the New Testament, is redirected in one of his missionary journeys to go to a different country than the one he was planning on through seeing something in a dream. So we are right to be careful around how we engage with dreams and visions, knowing what we know about psychology, about people's ability to twist things to what they want to hear. But if we want to have a genuinely biblical paradigm of God's intervention in the world, then we need to acknowledge that whether we like it or not, God seems to really enjoy speaking through our dreams, our unconscious mind, and our imagination. So if we want to take the Bible seriously, then we need to take dreams and visions seriously, to consider them more, to be open to God speaking to us through them. Now, I don't know what your experience of dreaming is. I think dreaming is one of those things that everyone does in a different way. For me, I often can't remember my dreams more than a few seconds after waking up. And what I do remember can often be very strange. Plenty of times, I think probably after staying up way too late playing computer games, I've then had my dreams filled with me running around shooting zombies with dressed up as a chicken in my childhood school or something, some combination of random events all put together. And feel free to send your interpretations in a postcard if you like, I know what that means. But the challenge we find is that when dreaming can be so random and subjective, but also this definite way that God speaks to people, how do we get better at hearing God's voice through both our imagination and our unconscious mind? Well, Pete Greig, one of the founders of 24/7 Prayer, and be completely upfront, one of the people who I've got nearly the majority of the content from this sermon from, very good stuff that he talks about, gives 3 really straightforward tips. First of all, we need to desire dreams, we need to honor them, and then we need to work on interpreting them. Okay, so desire dreams, honor dreams, and learn how to interpret them. Desiring dreams. Now, as I said, there will be a range of experiences around dreaming. Some will dream lots, some will not. And be comforted, there are no biblical examples of either King David, one of the key figures in the Old Testament, ever receiving divine revelation in a dream. And also, there are no examples of Jesus receiving divine revelation in a dream. So this is not a compulsory part of Christianity. This is not something we should feel guilty about if we don't do or we don't experience. But the language around it is always seen as a gift from God. So it is something that we can desire, that we can be excited about, that we can engage with. And it's something that we can ask for. And actually a practical response, if nothing else from this sermon, there is a risky thing that we can say just before we go to sleep, which is, God, please speak to me tonight. I want to hear your voice. Now we're opening ourselves up to hearing God speak through our dreams, through visions, through images of stuff that he wants to do in the world, and challenging us with that. So the first one is desiring dreams, and maybe just asking that question, God, speak to me tonight. Number 2 was honoring dreams, which means taking them seriously. In Daniel, we see that he writes down the substance of his dreams. Daniel, known for his ability to interpret dreams, anytime he gets something or anytime someone tells him, he writes it down. And I think there's just something in that which is taking it seriously. He wants to remember them. He considers that they may have some value to him. I was chatting to Kate, our ministry assistant here, and she told me a story where a ring that had been passed down from her nan to her mum and to her had broken. And she'd had it fixed, and then a few weeks later it had broken again, and so she got it fixed again, and then she started having dreams about this ring breaking. And obviously she could have just dismissed these dreams, they're just a bit weird, maybe she's just remembering or imagining the same thing that had just happened, but something about them just weighed a little bit more on her. And she wrote them down, and she shared it with a trusted friend. And there was a few weeks later, one time during worship with this friend, they were singing, they were praising, and the friend sort of felt the sense of the Spirit moving in, and the friend turned to her and said, I really feel like that image of the ring breaking is God breaking patterns that have come down through your family into your life. And that those are being broken and that you're freed from and that you don't have to worry about them. And this gave her a load of comfort, and more than that, it showed her that God saw her and her situation and spoke to her. And I think when we talk about dreams and visions, honoring them, actually that first moment of just saying, you know what, I'm going to write it down. That could be that you deliberately keep a notebook by your bed, or that first thing in the morning you say, do I remember anything? Do I have any dreams in those first few seconds? Was there anything last night? And just jotting them down and giving a space to think a bit more about this. Or maybe it is just having a conversation, explaining them to a friend, just to see if actually as you talk about it, anything else comes from it. So the first one is desiring dreams, the second one is honoring dreams, and then the third one is getting better at interpreting dreams. Daniel, again, says that he watched God's visions and he attempted to interpret them. Now, this is not a science. It's much more like an art form, like analyzing a poem or a book. We are seeking the implications of an image, the symbolic attachments, not the literal representation. And therefore, this is going to be personal for everyone. People have made a fair amount of money writing like lexicons of dream interpretation. If you dream about a monkey, then you're going to win the lottery. If you dream about an octopus, you need to change jobs. But this is unhelpful because it misses the individuality of God speaking directly to us into our situation and into our life. When God uses dreams, he's using our imagination to communicate to us in a deeply personal way. So, for example, in the story of Joseph, when the baker asks him to interpret his dream, the central image he refers to is bread. When he talks to the cupbearer, the image is wine. We struggle with the ideas of God speaking to us through dreams because they're completely subjective and therefore open to be interpreted however open to interpret it however we want. But the beauty of God speaking to us through our dreams is that we are the subject, and therefore their content often has an objective, specific meaning to us. So we know symbolism is different in different cultures for different people. The color red in the UK is seen as a symbol for danger or love or passion, but then in China it's used as a symbol for good luck. But when it comes to a dream, this doesn't really matter because it is the associations, the symbolic meaning for us that we are looking for, that we are wondering what it means. God uses our own psyches, our past experiences, our symbolic attachments, our imaginations, and therefore interpretation is not trying to understand a universal, what does this mean for everyone? It is simply saying, God, what does this mean to me? When Nebuchadnezzar asked Daniel to interpret his dream, he says, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. Daniel responds saying, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets and has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place. This idea of something being revealed that is going to happen. But he says that you may understand the innermost thoughts of your mind. And I just found this really remarkable reading this, because this is about 2,600 years before psychologists like Freud and Jung suggested that dreams were an expression of our unfulfilled desires. Daniel says that through the interpretation of dreams, God is revealing the innermost desires of Nebuchadnezzar's mind. So some dreams are the processing of our unconscious mind, and others we believe are from God. And it's okay to draw a distinction between these, because when we conflate the two, we can start to come to some very strange conclusions. I've met people with serious mental health issues who dream very vivid dreams, which they take very seriously. And because of everything else that's going on in their mind, they're unable to apply any discernment to these dreams. And it is absolutely okay for our first port of call when we see something to go, maybe that's coming from me. But it is also okay when certain dreams hit a bit harder and seem to speak to us in a different way, to offer those up to God and to ask if there's something more to take from this. Yes, this might still be my imagination, my mind that God's using, but I want to see, God, are you speaking to me through this? Is there something here that I haven't recognized or that might be important that I need to engage with? And sometimes God speaks directly to us in our dreams, like the wise men being told not to go back to Herod, but frankly, that's not been my experience. It's not been an experience I've seen of many different people, but other times God uses our dreams to highlight things that are going on with us. And I appreciate this is not a science. That creates a lot of ambiguity. But as we said, this is an art. This is something that, and it's also that when we're dealing with God, we're dealing with a person. We're not dealing with like a scientific formula or a program that always does things exactly the same way. And so we have to be able to live a little bit in that ambiguity. And it's the same with visions. There are times where people might physically see something from God. That, something that is not there in the room. That if I said, no one else can see this, and it would seem like this is utterly mad if I was to try and claim that that was physically in the world. But God does seem to do that in lots of stories in the Bible. People see angels, see things that are spiritually present that are not physically present. But actually, most of the time when we talk about visions, what we're often saying is that God uses our imagination to help us understand something that's spiritually taking place. An example is, so Amanda, who's one of the other curates at this church, she would say that she had a vision once of men walking into the church, like boldly walking into the church. And what she was saying is not that she physically saw it, but that God had placed this image in her mind, in her imagination, to say that actually, whereas the church, which has traditionally been very bad at reaching out to men, very bad at making a space that men feel comfortable in, we do a lot of singing, we do a lot of other things, and it's actually like saying that God wants to bring in men to the church and make spaces that men feel comfortable and men want to worship him. So she said she felt like God was saying something that was going to take place, and that something that God was making true in a spiritual sense. She wasn't claiming that she could physically see people walking into the church, but she was saying that God was giving her a vision of something spiritually taking place. And so God uses our imagination, God uses our unconscious mind to try and communicate things to us that he wants us to know. But I also want us to think about, like, how do we be practical with that? How can we begin to identify when God is speaking to us and when we've just eaten too much cheese before bedtime? Or more dangerously, when are we just projecting our own desires and things that we want and claiming, oh, that's what God's saying to us, okay? And again, this Pete Gray guy, he gives us 3 things he says are really useful, the ABC, okay? And the first one is it affirming? When God gives us something, he gives it to us to build up the church, to build people up. God comes to bring life and encouragement. So we have to think about the thing that we're sharing, the thing that we're hearing. Does it build people up? Does it encourage? Or does it bring despair and destruction? That's not to say God never challenges us or provokes us, but as a really healthy starting point, we should look to see if our interpretation of a dream, what we think God is saying, is going to bring life, not guilt or shame. So the first one is it affirming? Secondly, is it biblical? God has revealed himself through his word, and so we learn to recognize his voice through reading it. Does what we're hearing tie in with the mission of God throughout the Bible? Like we see, does this seem in line with what God is doing? Does this seem like something that would fit? God doesn't give us a vision that then says that goes against everything he stands for in the Bible. He's revealed himself there, and he wants us to use that as our touch point to see if the thing that we're experiencing lines up with that. And then thirdly, is it Christ-like? Is it in line with the kind of thing Jesus would say and do? Now, that doesn't mean it's never challenging, but it does mean that it's ultimately loving. Does it reflect his love and his kindness? And so those 3 things are just a useful way of just testing things to see if they maybe are from God or maybe they're from us. And then even then, we still add on a little bit of common sense as well. If I was to say, like, this, when I say common sense, that doesn't just mean the way we've always done things. It does mean being adventurous and brave when we hear God's voice. Often, when he speaks to us, it's to shake us up a little bit. But God puts a lot of emphasis on wisdom in the Bible, and therefore it's okay to apply that. If I was to go to my wife, I said, look, I had a dream last night. I really feel like God wants us to get a hot tub. I was in a hot tub in the dream, and I think what he's saying is we need a hot tub. And then my wife goes, we don't have any space in our house for a hot tub. There's nowhere that could go. That's not a lack of faith on her part. That is some common sense applying to something that I may then have to go, yeah, maybe that's not from God. I don't know. It's a question that we ask ourselves. But holding all of that, there's a level of caution, there's a level of wariness, but there's also an excitement and a desire for it. That God of heaven cares about us enough to speak to us. Like, that should just be something that blows our minds. That God will give us dreams and visions. He will speak not just generically, big words of proclamation, but speak directly to our hearts, directly into our minds, the things that matter to us, the images, the experiences. Think of the level that knowledge that God must have for us if he's willing to speak directly into use the things that we care about to speak to us. And so therefore, how do we respond to it? Well, then simple things, putting a pen and paper next to our bed and praying before we go to sleep. Lord, I want to hear your voice more. In John 10:27, Jesus says, my sheep know my voice. So while it is okay to be wise about all this, it is okay to be cautious, we don't have to be scared of it. When we are followers of Christ, we are his sheep. His voice becomes the most comforting. His voice becomes the most commanding, and it becomes the most compelling sound that we experience. Because that is what this is all about. It's not about us finding out the future and what's going to happen next. It's not about dealing with our repressed psyche. It is about engaging with Jesus and inviting him to speak his love and his wisdom and his guidance into our lives and to the world around us.